So, um, growing up on the East Coast, Metro New York, what is that like?
Um,
Jersey.
it was great.
It's
I mean, it
great.
was the 80s. It was a different
It
time.
was the 80s. It was the 80s,
It was the 80s. Nobody cared about anything.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So what were
It
you
was
like in the 80s?
um the same in a lot of ways. I was like a nerdy child who like spent a lot of time in her own brain, like thinking
Yeah.
about things. Which is still how I am. Like I
Yeah.
think about like, oh, in like middle school or high school, like awkward growing pains stuff, but I didn't really notice it because I was like reading my like Star Wars books or like whatever I like.
Right. Yeah. What music were you into back in the 80s?
um I really liked Billy Joel,
Yeah.
and
Well,
like
yeah. New York.
like
Yeah.
my second ever concert was, I guess it was the 90s. It was Billy Joel and Elton John went on tour together.
Nice. Oh
The
my, that's
first
fun.
time that they went on tour together, and that was like the second concert that I ever went to. And I went with my parents.
These are my parents. Don't mind them. They're.
Yeah.
Well, we're not watching. We're not watching. Yeah, just yeah. Right. What was your first concert?
The first concert was for a friend's birthday party, and it was the Backstreet Boys.
For a friend's birthday party?
Yeah, it was like just a few of us. And we went to see
It
the
was an
Backstreet.
intimate gathering. It was a
Yeah.
Backstreet Boys. Oh wow. Oh, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So from Jersey, the East Coast, to the Valley of the Sun. What's the
Yeah.
same and what's different in the Valley of the Sun?
Well, everything is different actually. There's like not a lot of similarities. The like the heat, I mean, it's actually, we had our first 95-degree day 2 days ago, like April,
Good.
mid-April. It starts hitting the 90s. So
I
the
mean, we
heat,
got the 40s yesterday here,
yeah, like the heat is like a whole other level. Like I thought like, oh, I lived in LA, like it gets
yeah.
hot there, but like no, it's like nothing. It's a whole it's like nothing I'd ever experienced. And like just everything looks different. Like the landscape is a lot, everything is like smaller, like the trees don't grow as tall, and it's like brown as the dominant color. I mean, it's pretty in its own way when you get out of the city and you can like
Yeah.
see the cactuses. It's like really lovely, but it's just like you're on a different world.
Yeah.
And like the buildings are all different because everything is like designed around the heat.
Right.
So you don't have, there's very few like tall structures because there's so much space also, so you can just like build out. And so it's just like almost the opposite of New Jersey. Like it's not very dense. There are people, but like it's nothing like the density in New Jersey. And the variety of food is a lot less. The tacos are really good, so that's probably
So what do you do for seasons? I mean you're a northerner, so
yeah,
what do you do with seasons
I
and the
mean, I miss the
colors and yeah.
seasons. There's seasons, they're just like way more subtle. Like, I mean, it gets cool in the winter, and because it's a desert, it gets cold at night. So
Yeah.
like
Yeah, true enough.
the temperature swings can be like 30 degrees or 40 degrees in a day, like from the high to the low. So it's like a very extreme place.
Extreme.
And interestingly, Tucson has a monsoon season, which I didn't really appreciate until I moved here. But in like July, August, and September, you can get these like moisture patterns coming from the south, like either from the Sea of Cortez and like the Baja, or from the Gulf of Mexico. Some of them are like driven by hurricanes coming through, and then we get like remnant moisture, but some of it is coming from other things. And so the Sonoran Desert is like where Tucson is, and that it's actually the wettest desert. I just learned that.
Wow.
So the whole life cycle is like organized around the infrequent rain. Like it rains sometimes in the winter, a little, like a couple inches over the whole winter, and everything, if it rains, like everything frantically tries to complete its life cycle. Like there's like pollen and flowers and so it can be really pretty, and then there'll be like months with no rain, and it's just super dry.
Yeah. You're a molder of young minds. So how is that? What does that feel like?
It's
Molding the future. You mold the future.
it's like, it's kind of weird. I mean, it's in some sense it's fun. Like I have graduate students or like students that I work directly with on research projects.
Yeah.
And that's very interesting. Like I see how different people are from each other, even if everyone like is ostensibly there for the same reason. The like way that they react to situations is very different. So I find that interesting. I worry about like, oh, am I doing a good job? I teach a class, right. This semester I'm teaching like mostly first year undergrads, and it's kind of intro to astronomy. And that's an interesting challenge because for many of them, they're taking it as like a gen ed requirement, but they're not going to go into science. And it may be the only science class that they take in college, or like the last science class that they'll ever take. And so I
In
like
their life, right? Yeah.
yeah. And I feel this like, how do I show them that science is valuable to them, even if they don't become scientists? Or like,
Yeah.
what if they become a senator? Like, how can I at least give them some way to be like, oh, this is valuable? And that's like a weird challenge that sometimes anxiety inducing. It's like
Anxiety inducing.
but I try to talk about like less about facts of things and more about like, how do we know the fact? Like, how do you measure something? How do you discover something? So like in my students are taking an exam today, but on Friday we're talking about galaxies and like how observations of galaxies led us to figure out the Big Bang. And then like, what is the evidence that we have for the Big Bang? And like, how does that fit into our theory? And like, to show like the process of getting to a kind of a conception of how the universe works. And also to emphasize, like in past classes, I've talked about like the different theories of gravity and how like our conception of how gravity works is like continuously changing and like getting maybe closer to, there's no such thing as like objective truth, but like getting closer to like a model that works in all circumstances. And how, and like, I think this came up a lot in the pandemic, that people were mad when like the scientific recommendation would change.
Right.
And they're like, well, last week you told us this and now you're telling us this. And like, people don't like that, but like, that's actually the way that it's supposed to work, of like, oh, we have new information, we like update things.
That is the scientific method. It's like, it is supposed to evolve and change, right? Yeah. So the one thing you hope your students take with them into life, what's the one thing, if there was one thing you hope they get?
I hope that they like take a level of like criticism of what is presented to them. Like in the last lecture, when I teach this class, I always have a slide that's like, you know, there's like large groups of people who benefit from injecting doubt into different situations. And it's like kind of the same playbook over and over again. And like the oldest example is with like the big tobacco, of like, there weren't people who were like, oh, this research that smoking causes cancer is wrong. They didn't try and disprove it. They just wanted to inject enough doubt in people's minds that they would be like, well, we can't really know, so we shouldn't do anything. And like, and then that's the same thing with climate change. It's like, oh, we're not positive, so we can't do anything. Or like with gun violence, like, well, we don't know, so we can't do anything. And this like idea that it's impossible to know anything for sure is like what I want to like fight against with them. That like, you can know things, and like and also you can listen to someone who is telling you like, oh, maybe you should think about this. Like it can be phrased in a way that is like, you're thinking critically, because you should think more about whatever this problem is. But then what they're really injecting is doubt in a way that is just designed to like prevent action.
Right.
So being able to kind of like recognize that, and thinking about, who benefits from the status quo, or who benefits from whatever the thing is like also a key indicator of whether or not someone is trying to like divert you.
Right.
Yeah.
Or just divert the conversation. Yeah, because it's just diverting the conversation, and now we're not engaging
Right. On the topic, you're like,
Absolute, right,
you're like
yeah.
talking about something else. Yeah.
It's why I reached out, because even when I learned your story a few years ago, the redefining of success and failure is part of this. I think for me, and what this all gets wrapped up for where I'm at in life, it's not, we're not binary. We don't live in a binary world. We don't live in it's not yes or no. It's not this or that. And in one of your TED Talks, I tried to write it down. You want to have failure to be present in everything.
Yeah.
And I thought that was profound. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Failure present in everything. Yeah.
So like I mean, even in the example of my class, like I give them a quiz, and then if they fail, that's like a bad thing. And like we like set up this paradigm from very early ages of like failure is bad and you should feel bad about it. And like when you're out in the world, like not as a student, but just like as an adult doing stuff, like a failure usually means that you tried something and like maybe it didn't work out, but at least you tried it. And that like I want to like push for more experimentation of like try something new and see what happens, and not to be so fixated on the outcome, but more about like the process, that like, oh well, you tried it, and like that's the valuable thing. And the process of like, what did you learn? And it's sort of just like applying the scientific method on a bigger scale, because the whole point of like the revolution in science that started a couple hundred years ago is because of the scientific method, that there was like a series of steps that you could take to like test your hypothesis instead of just doing an observation and trying to like fit something to it. You could be like, oh, I do this experiment and A should happen, and then B happens, and then you're like, why? And then you do it again. And like, if you have a hypothesis that can't be falsified, that like can't be proved wrong, then it's useless. And like, so the whole basis is that the hypothesis can fail. And that's how you make progress. And so I feel like the failure is good because it means that like you were trying and that you learned something. And like, that's all you could do.
Right. And yes, there's risk involved. And yes, there's vulnerability. And yes, of course there is. Of course. And to lean into that more than to shy away from, to get people to lean into the risk, to get people, yeah.
And like risk taking can feel really bad for people, like, and a lot of people are in more precarious situations than I am, so it's like easy for me to be like, yeah, take a risk, because like
I lived in the 80s, take a risk, it's like
everyone was taking risks.
Everybody was taking risks, right? Yeah, it's like,
right. But I think like a lot of that is also directed towards like employers, or like there can be like a lot of conformity in how employers want their employees to behave, or like how to do different processes. And I think giving people more latitude of like, hey, try something out, and like encourage that but they have to understand like, okay, it's some fraction of the time it's not going to work, and like that has to be part of the cost of doing business, versus just being like, oh, the most important thing is making money for the shareholders or whatever.
Right.
Another relic of the 80s that I wish would go away.
Right.
But like, right, people have to have that structure to feel supported. And that's actually something when I teach my like graduate students or the people I mentor, that giving them like a support structure where I can say like, you can try this and I'm not going to think that you're stupid if it doesn't work. Like that's like really important to them, to feel like people can't take risks unless they feel like there's someone looking out for them.
Right. Which then isn't a risk. In some sense is, yeah, if you have to know the outcome, that's not really a risk.
It's like, for my students, if I'm like, okay, spend 6 months working on something, and then it doesn't work out, like the way to get around that is to be like, well, I'll keep you on another 6 months so you could try something else. Or like, all that you've lost is the time. Although the time is valuable, but like, versus saying like, oh, you have 6 months to do this, and if it doesn't work, you're fired.
You're out of here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that, yeah, and it's been interesting. I think kind of where we are in society, we had this kind of moments of exploration, and where I think culturally we were reaching out and trying to set up new paradigms, and now we're swinging in this movement to try to close the lid on that. And it's
Yeah.
just, and it's just, it's sad. It's like, you just want to ask, what do you know, what's the fear?
Yeah.
Why the fear in all of that? Why, what's the fear of exploration and challenging what we believed was absolute, and it may not be absolute anymore.
Yeah. I think a lot of, I mean, it's definitely like a fear-based thing that people in control of stuff don't want. There's a lot of like structures in society that want people to feel like they're not valuable, or like they are interchangeable. And I actually do think people are interchangeable, but I think that in a way that like the person at the top can easily be replaced by any other person who would do just as good of a job.
Right.
As long as the person is trying, like, but frequently it's used more like in the downward direction of like, oh, well, you shouldn't get paid enough because I can get someone else to do this. But I feel like it actually,
right, yeah,
it's easier in the other direction. Like
right.
I talk with people about designing like mission concepts for NASA, or for like, these big projects. And one of the things I say is like, any idiot can be the principal investigator, the like PI of it, which is the person at the top. And like,
yeah,
like it doesn't require a special talent. You just have to like pay attention, but you don't need to be this like unique genius. Like, and there's I think a huge misconception about a lot of not just science, but other things, that like, oh, the person at the top is this like unique genius, and they're not. They're just lucky, or like they made one good choice and like followed through on it, and like, but luck is a huge part of that. And yeah, so I mean, even for me, I feel like, well, lots of people could do my job, but my interpretation of that is like, so that doesn't mean that I should try and like squash everyone to keep that from happening. It just means that I should do as good of a job as I can.
Right. Yeah. So who would you like to replace? If you could replace anybody, if you could say, I'm the next monkey, who would you like to replace? What would you like to do next in the world?
I mean, I would love to be one of the Artemis astronauts that are going to the moon.
To the moon. I know. I was like, oh, maybe Erika will be there. Oh,
yeah, that would be great. Yeah, next time there'll be more. Yeah. And but yeah, I feel like, I mean, I think that there's like maybe going back to your earlier question about like the fear, that like there's this mindset of like scarcity versus abundance. And like when I think about those, the Artemis astronauts, I feel like, well, I wish that one of them was me, but I'm also happy that someone is going. And like I think the reverse of that attitude is like, well, if I can't go, then nobody should go. And I think that there's a lot of like, if I can't be in charge, like this shouldn't exist. Or if I, this like someone else moving up in the world is like me moving down. And I don't think that's the case. I think that like when you like help bring people up, like everybody does better.
Yeah, and it gives permission. So if they go and do well, then that means more people may well go and do well.
Yeah.
And would be you'll be, they'll go, oh, the next Artemis 2. It's like, yeah, Erika. It'll be, yeah. But but it's about, we talk about permission giving. Me or you succeeding gives me permission to succeed. It doesn't, we don't have to, it's not a
zero sum.
Yeah, it's not a zero sum thing.
Yeah. And I think so much of like what we hear out in society is like a zero sum of like, oh, this person's doing well, this person's like losing. And I don't think that's I mean, that I think serves as a distractor, because then your attention is focused like sideways. And I don't buy that.
Right. And then my interest is not to further anything, it's just to take you down.
Right.
And lift me up. And that doesn't further anybody, really.
Yeah. I mean, and like what's discovered, what's new, what's built in that, there's nothing.
Nothing, right. Yeah. So astronaut, you're a pilot yet? Now? Yes?
So
No?
close. So I just had a lesson yesterday. So
Oh, good for you.
I'm almost done with my like private pilot certificate, which is like the first
Yeah.
level. So I have like 2 more hours of, or no, 1 hour of what's called under the hood time. So when you're the first like license is just for flight in what are called visual flight rules. So like no clouds, no severe weather, in your like little rinky-dink airplane. But they give you 3 hours of instrument training where you don't see out of the front of the cockpit. Like you wear these like blockers that like cut off the top half of your vision and like the side. So you can't see out the windows, you can only see the instruments. And the idea is like if you fly into a cloud, because like whatever things happen, like you have to know enough to be able to turn around and get out of the cloud. But if you've never flown in those conditions, it's like very disorienting because your brain relies so much on the visual cues.
Right.
And like if you don't have the visual cues, your brain will think, oh, the airplane is climbing, when in fact it's actually in a dive, but you can't tell because so you have to be able to rely on what the instruments say, what the altitude indicator is, like the speed. And that just takes practice to like teach your brain to ignore the like sensations from your ears and instead just rely on like this other stuff. So there's later licenses where you actually do like all instrument training, and then like you can do commercial pilot license and like the certified flight instructor license. So there's like lots of levels, but so I have about 1 more hour of time in just like instrument conditions, and then I have to take the written test, and then I have to take the actual practical, like
Yeah.
the check flight. So I'm close to the end. It's been a long time of lessons. Like my first lesson was in 2015, and it's been like
Yeah. I've always wanted to learn how to fly helicopters. And I took one lesson, and it was for me, life got in the way and it was expensive. At least that's what I told myself. It was expensive, and but yeah, I would like to get back. So the difficult flight in space, there is no is that part of it? There is no up or down. There's no left and, so to orient in space, how does that work?
It's completely non-intuitive. Like all of the kind of rules are different because you're dealing, instead of with just like, a gravitational field like on Earth, you're dealing with orbital mechanics. And so certain things, like if you're orbiting at a certain speed around the Earth and you like speed up your spacecraft, like you might think that means that you should head away from the Earth, but depending on how you do it, you actually are like moving into a tighter orbit and like closer, or like, so there's just a bunch of or for example, like people talk about you want to like shoot someone into the sun, but it actually takes like a tremendous amount of energy to shoot something into the sun, and it's better to just like shoot them into deep space, is like actually less energy. So stuff like that where you think like, oh, the sun has lots of gravity, it should be pulling everything to it, and it's like, well, that's not exactly how it works.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
But the pilot's license isn't a requirement. It's more of just like an indication that you have been in kind of a challenging environment and that you can like keep your head. And like they also really like people who have spent a year in Antarctica or like have been in these like extreme situations. Interestingly, they also like CIA agents. A few of them have become astronauts because they can like deal with any situation.
Yeah, pretty extreme situations and thinking off the wood, and well, like when you talk to Rain, it was like scuba diving is like another thing. Yes, as far as well, that's interesting. Your origin story with yoga. What's your origin story with yoga?
So this is like, I don't know, maybe it's not that silly, but I got into it when I was at Caltech as a postdoc, and I was there for 4 years, and the gym. So Caltech is like the nerdiest place that I've spent a lot of time. It's like nerdier than MIT. It's like, which is great. Like the basketball team like won a game while I was there, and it was the first time they had just like won a game in like over a decade, and they were so excited for just So,
We celebrated for weeks. It's like,
yeah, like they were like so thrilled. It was really cute, but they so the astronomy building was right in front of like a soccer field, and then the gym was directly behind that soccer field. So I would go to the Caltech gym, which was really nice, but no one was ever there because they're all nerds. And so,
to the
and
gym.
I went with a friend to a yoga class. They had like a beginning yoga class, and then I started going because it was like a good time after, like not too long after I usually finished work, and I could just walk over there and do this nice yoga, and I would like feel so good. And after doing that for a couple of years, actually, I had talked to the instructor because I wanted to be able to do so there was this movie that came out called Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt, and it's actually such a good movie. I feel like it's underappreciated. And there's like a time loop, and in the scene where you first meet Emily Blunt's character, she's doing this like yoga arm balance where her hands are on the ground but her feet are off the ground, and it's like super cool looking. And I looked up the name of that pose and I showed it to the yoga instructor at this Caltech class, and I was like, where can I go to learn how to do this? And and he was like, oh, there's this new studio that opened like about a 15-minute drive from Caltech. So I went there, and I was really nervous because like I was not a yoga person, and the class was like so hard. The people could do these incredible handstands, just like they would like put their hands on the ground and like lift their feet up like gravity didn't exist. I was like, oh my God, like this is amazing. And it was so hard. And then afterwards I was like, oh, I feel so good. Like it made me feel great. And I, it was so hard that I spent the entire hour thinking about what I was doing instead of where you kind of like check out and your brain is like thinking about other stuff. It was like, oh, I had to like really be present to do it. And I just like loved that feeling. And the teachers at this particular studio practiced like a very challenging type of yoga, and it just like really clicked with me. And so that was in 2018. And I actually have like a calendar event in my Google Calendar that's like the yearly anniversary of when I went to that first class. And I still work with that instructor. Like during the pandemic, she put a ton of classes online, so I was able to like do them from Tucson. She was in LA and then she moved to Colorado, but now we do like Zoom sessions once a week, and I like still working on that handstand.
Handstand? I know. So yeah, I got into it in 2019, and I remember some of the, you see these poses and you're like, yeah, that's never going to happen with this body. It's like I lived in the 80s. My body's never going to do that. It's like, but I find it interesting, your story. You in another talk, you said gravity is your favorite force. You said, but yet your whole life, so astronaut, pilot, handstand is to defy gravity.
Is it a fight against gravity?
It's a fight against gravity. What does that say, Erika?
It's like those like old spy movies where like the US spy and the Russian spy, like they like are like always going against each other, but actually they have like a great deal of respect for each other, and like in different circumstances they would be friends. Like that's what's happening.
Yeah, because when you were just telling your yoga story, I mean, when you talked about handstand, you lit up. I mean, it's like this. Yeah. You even said she was defying gravity. Man.
Yeah, it was like so cool. Gravity is so weird, and like, I mean, I talk about that with my class of like the other forces are orderly and we like understand them, and they like operate on certain scales and like are coherent with each other. But gravity is like the one weirdo that is like, it's way weaker. It's like you'd be gravity all the time. If you jump, you're temporarily beating gravity, and like you can't temporarily beat any of the other forces. Right. But at the same time, gravity is like on the scale of the universe, it's the only thing that matters, because it like is the only thing that can act over those long scales. Like that's it. And it's so weird. And like also like if it weren't for that, we wouldn't be here. So I appreciate it.
I appreciate it, but I would still like to challenge it every once in a while. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then, of course, the probing question is, so does that lead into the challenging of absolutes and this notion of taking on the things that we think are absolutely true and maybe they're not? And does it play into that a little bit?
Yeah, maybe. I think like I'm my like research isn't really about gravity, but I'm always interested in like how people are addressing it. And like,
Yeah.
um, I think as I get older, I'm really curious about like what is real and what isn't real, or like what is made up, and like which things do you have to do or must you do, like, and what is kind of like, oh well, someone made up this rule, and like that, like, that's made up, I don't have to follow that.
Right. I'm not obligated to follow your rules that you made up.
Yeah, versus like, well, like electromagnetism is what it is, so you just got to deal, or like, you know, the laws of thermodynamics. And but
Right.
I feel like, I think when I was younger, you just assume like, oh, that's the way things are, it like has to be this way. And now I think more and more of like, oh no, this is made up. And maybe the pandemic accelerated that, because then it was like so obvious how many things were made up.
Right. And I 100%, I think coming on this, as we, have looked back and see what we learned, it was how much was really not real and not true and was made up. And yeah, and it smacked us in the face. And
Yeah.
it was shocking. You just go, this is crazy. Right. Yeah. That we fell into that. You were a chef for a while.
Yeah.
What's your favorite thing to cook?
So my favorite thing to cook is like desserts or pies specifically, but I just love the kind of like Pennsylvania Dutch, like Americana type desserts, like cakes, brownies,
Yeah.
pies, and I like to eat occasionally, but like the more like refined French style desserts, like the fancy patisserie and stuff, is like fun and pretty, but it's like not my favorite. I would take like a glorious chocolate chip cookie any day.
Over top of that. Oh, good for you. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Pennsylvania Dutch. I thought it's going to be, oh, okay, like noodles over potatoes. And it's like, no, that's not really
Oh
cool.
no, but the desserts are like,
Yeah,
that's
the
like a
desserts are
type of,
good. Right, right.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, just like really like solid, reliable,
Yeah.
uncomplicated desserts.
Nice.
Like a nice cake. I got in the sort of deep pandemic, I was baking like, I'd make like a loaf cake or like a cake with like fruit in it,
Yeah.
like once a week, and then like eat it over the week. And
Yeah.
that was really fun. I look forward to that, just to like
Oh,
have
cool.
something to mark the time.
Yeah. That's nice. You get back to the East Coast much?
Yeah, a couple times a year, probably.
Yeah.
And I've always been back a lot. Like the pandemic. So that was the longest time that I had ever spent like away from New Jersey. From like the first, it was the March to I guess that July of 2020. Like I had been in New Jersey earlier in the month, like the end of February. So then that like 6-month period or 5-month period had been actually the longest time I had spent away from home ever. And then I drove to New Jersey from Arizona and spent a couple weeks in the summer of 2020, because I didn't want to fly and we didn't have
Yeah.
like medical grade masks and stuff. So that drive was terrible. And I we stayed in like Airbnbs or like camped out to avoid hotels, because and I felt like my whole objective through the pandemic had been to not give COVID to my parents. That was like the number one thing. So
Right.
I was like, whatever it takes to get there and not be exposed to anybody. And then I spent 2 weeks there, and then I drove back home, and then I didn't go home again until the following summer. So there was like a year period. That was the longest. But then since then I've gone every couple of months, and like sometimes I'll have work on the East Coast, or like to go to DC or whatever, and then I can like add a trip to New Jersey.
So Fireball's still connected with Columbia, or?
Yeah.
So you're still there's still trips to come back there. Cool.
Yeah.
Where is Fireball now? What's up with that?
So right now it's at Caltech, actually.
Right.
It was here
Right.
from like October to end of February. And we were redoing some optical alignment. One very critical mirror had like shifted. So we had to like remove it from its mount and then like realign it. And that was really challenging. But it was fun. Like we spent a ton of time in the lab. The alignment tools that we use, we're trying a new alignment technique, and it worked really well. And it just was like kind of tricky to get a hang of. So we spent a lot of time just like playing around with it. And then we like put everything back together. Once this one mirror was in the right place, then we could like put everything else close it up, and then we shipped it to Caltech, where there's a high bay for doing a bunch of the like kind of end-to-end testing. So it'll be at Caltech for a few more months, and then we'll send it to New Mexico in the summer, and then we'll all go to New Mexico in August.
Oh,
and we'll try again.
Yeah, but right. I mean, this is it. Yeah. I mean, that's the story.
Yeah.
Last group of questions, right? So we're Earthandcup, and so the Earth of Earthandcup is groundedness, and so it's grounds you, and then the cup of Earthandcup is, if we see ourselves as a cup, we have to empty ourselves so that we can be filled again. So that's Earthandcup. So what grounds you? And then how do you empty your cup, and how do you fill your cup?
So let's see. I think my work grounds me a lot. Like I think in like deep down, I'm like a nihilist or an existentialist, where I feel like the universe, I say this to my mom, but she doesn't really like it. I tell her the universe is vast and indifferent. Like the universe doesn't care about us. Like we're just here because of gravity. And I find that really valuable, that it's like in all the stuff that I've done, or all like the failures where, you know, like the sun rises in the morning and like the earth continues to spin, and like stars form and stars die, and like nothing matters. And like for me, that's a very liberating feeling of like, oh, this doesn't matter. Like all of the stakes are small. Like, and maybe that's why I feel okay with risk taking, because it's just like, oh, whatever. Like one day the sun will engulf the earth in the end stages of its life, and like literally everything will be destroyed anyway. So like whatever, do whatever you want.
You're gonna go ahead.
And like I find
that's why that's right.
Yeah. I find that so
freeing, liberating was the word you used.
Yeah, like I think that's so valuable, that like lowers the stakes of everything, and like nothing is really that big of a deal. So like thinking about the like even just like the stars in our own galaxy, that like, oh well, like we're here for this like tiny fraction of a second compared to how they last. And I just think that that's so valuable, and like it provides this perspective that helps every day, I think. Because I think about it every day. So like reminded every day of like how tiny we are. We're like a grain of sand. We're like less than a grain of sand.
Yeah.
And I like that.
Yeah. Nice. And hydrogen is the answer to everything. That's what I've learned.
It's hydrogen and gravity. Nothing else
are the answer to life's questions. Hydrogen and gravity.
Yeah. But like the idea that like nothing matters, I think is like, it is so valuable to me. Like, oh, it doesn't matter. Like there's no sense in like getting really worked up about things, because nothing ultimately matters. And for me, that means that like the only thing that matters is like what is happening right now, and the people right now, or like your life right now is the only thing, because in the long run there's nothing.
Yeah we'll just be nothing, you know. I mean, not even dust.
Eventually we'll just be reduced to a bunch of particles. And
yeah. Nice. that's invigorating. It's like that's free. Yeah, it's like, oh, If people wanted to check out what you're doing, where might they find you? How about that?
So I have like a very active Instagram account. It's just like Erika Hamden is my handle. Very easy to find me. And I post a little bit. I post like pictures of like what I'm up to or like things happening in my life, but I also post these like little videos of like random space stuff.
Oh, wow.
That's like it's not topical at all. I like barely talk about like, oh, a new discovery of whatever. Like I never do that. I just talk about, it started as like weird things in space because like there's so many weird things and I think they're so funny and like and then I started just posting them and people like it, and so now I like post a couple times a week, and my cousin helps me edit the videos, and she's 21, so she's good at it.
Right.
But it's just like I'm trying to think of a recent one. Oh yeah, so like one recent one that people liked was what's the farthest distance that humans have ever been from the Earth, and it's not that far. It's in the Apollo missions, like that's when humans went the farthest away from the Earth, but it was actually Apollo 13 because they didn't go into orbit around the moon. They just like swung around the back of the moon and came back. And that swing out, they were about twice as far from the surface of the moon as the other Apollo missions, which went into orbit. So their swing took them, I think they were like 150 miles up off the surface. Everyone else had been like 60 miles.
Yeah. Okay.
And so that's like the neighborhood. That's like being like, oh yeah, the farthest I've ever been is down the block.
Right. Yes. Right. Right. I've been to New York City. It's like, does that count? No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
You live in it. Right. You live in the area. Right. It's like,
so, but like, so yeah, so people, then they're just kind of random things like that, or like the one that people really liked early on was that space smells like burnt steak and metal. Like when astronauts come back in and they like repressurize the airlock and they take off their suits, it's like this like acrid burnt smell that fills the airlock that and we're not totally sure where it comes from. That's just like the oxidation of the spacesuit when it goes out, or if there's like these little molecules that like come in that have this smell when they're exposed to oxygen. But it's like so it's stuff like that where it's like, oh, that doesn't matter, but also it's very funny. And so
it's very cool and it's fun. Yeah. Yeah. It's like, oh, what does space smell like? Oh, well, it smells like burnt metal. Right. Oh,
yeah.
Oh, cool. So Instagram. And the slick handle of Erika Hamden.
Erika Hamden. Yeah. I have a Twitter account and a TikTok that I like. We'll post the same things too. So, choose your social media.
Choose your platform. Oh, cool. Well, thanks for sitting down. I know you've got a class, and thanks for sitting down. And
yeah,
no,
so nice.
Oh, it was good to see you. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Erika.